Good evening, everyone, or afternoon, or morning, whenever you get a chance to listen to this. I am currently recording in the evening, so that's what I'll keep saying tonight. Tonight I am preaching on Habakkuk, and I will begin in a quick word of prayer. So if you join me in your homes. Dear Lord, I just want to pray that you would be speaking through me even now. I pray that we would have open hearts and open ears to listen to what you would have to say, and that you would be able to work around my humanness and say what needs to be said, and I pray that we would hear what needs to be heard. In your name, amen. So as I said, I will be talking about Habakkuk tonight. If any of you are like myself, you have no idea what Habakkuk is about. Growing up, I've never heard a sermon preached on it. I've barely even heard anyone make reference to it other than to say bless you after someone says the name Habakkuk, because it can kind of sound like a sneeze. So it was actually very exciting to be able to dig into this text and learn from it. So I hope that you all can engage in at least some of the excitement that I was able to have. Typically, as I give a sermon, I would read the passage that I am focused on, but since this is a book, even though it is short at 3 chapters, I'm not going to read the whole thing because that would chew up way too much of my time. Instead, I will try and synthesize a little bit what the book is about, what we can glean from it, and then I'll kind of launch into it. So when we read this book, we find ourselves in Jerusalem near the rise of the Babylonian Empire. Habakkuk sees this rise and sees the coming end to Israel. He sees the way that military might and wealth and power are prized in Babylon, and how it will just continue to roll over nation after nation until eventually it will arrive in Israel. The book refers to them as the Chaldeans, and yes, I did look that up, and I probably still butchered it, but that's okay. Our writer, Habakkuk, is not the typical prophet who rails against the sins of Israel. Instead, the book is written as a lament to God. Habakkuk pleads for Israel and even questions God. He questions God's seeming inaction against the aggressing empire of Babylon. We can read this book and get the feeling that Habakkuk is even disrespectful, that he calls God and calls out to God and claims that God might not be just, that God might not be good, because how could a good and just God simply sit idle at the destruction of his chosen people and the fall of his chosen nation? It'd be similar to something like this. I'm sitting here and I begin my prayer to God and I say, hey, excuse me, God. It's Cameron Rose. You know me. I'm in Glendale, attending Fuller Seminary. Grew up in Oregon. This is awkward. So when you get a moment from scolding Habakkuk, because I know it's probably what you're doing up there, got a couple questions. So, what's the deal? What's going on? How could you let something like COVID-19 run rampant in the world? God, don't you realize that people are dying? Do you even care? We're down here and we're suffering, and you just sit in heaven. Do you have a clue of what's going on? Do you know? Is it worse if you know, or is it worse if you don't care? There are good and righteous people down here who are hurting. Actually, you know what? Speaking of which, I do have a list of people who should get COVID. Like, if you want to just start punishing the people that I think should get punished, let's save the righteous people, but let's get those bad ones. That'd be cool. But I'm missing the point. We'll get back to that. You can hit me up later, DM me, whatever. But right now, like, what's going on? Clearly, you're not doing anything. So if you could at least say something, that would be great. I'd love to at least hear your voice on this, because there's too much going on. Okay, well that seems like long enough. If I didn't hear you, so if you could get back to me when I'm not busy, that'd be great. Like if I'm doing homework, great time. If I'm watching Mandalorian again, probably not, because I'm really looking for those Easter eggs. But yeah, get back to me on my schedule. That'd be great. Look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, so something like that. I hope that you can all catch the sarcasm and the irony within that little tantrum and monologue, because that would be it's disrespectful, and we can fall in the trap of reading Habakkuk in the same way. That Habakkuk sounded how I just sounded, selfish, petty, disgusting, really. But the struggle we have is that this was written over 2,000 years ago. And even when we're writing something written today, it's difficult to fully understand the emotions of the person who's writing and the setting that they're writing from. At least Habakkuk had the decency to wait long enough for God to respond. My little monologue, it's something that I think we actually do kind of often. Is we shout out to God and then we never actually wait for a response. So even if Habakkuk is disrespectful, at least he sat and waited and listened for God's voice. Sitting on this side of history, these over 2,000 years later from when it's written, we can cast judgment on someone that we've never met, don't understand, and haven't really put in the effort to know what's going on. And here we see the evil that we are facing. And we blame Habakkuk for being confused for the evil that he was facing, while giving ourselves compassion and time to sit in our emotions. What I don't want to say is that the evils in this world are minor. I don't want to shortchange the evil that we're facing. I don't want to shortchange the evil that Habakkuk was facing. I think today we can very easily complain to God about a near infinite amount of things that are wrong in the world and wrong in other people. The evil in this world forces its way into our lives, and it causes us real pain. We feel the repercussions in the way that it causes us harm, and the way that we cause harm to others. It's pretty obvious that our world is far from perfect, and we are in no way perfect people. All of our actions have consequences and affect the people around us, and the actions of others affect us in the same way. I'm sure that none of what I'm saying right now is coming as a surprise. And so I hope in the same way we can understand the struggle that Habakkuk was facing, a tangible enemy in the form of an aggressive empire, while living in a nation that wasn't much better. The depravity of humanity allows for evil to rise up. We're sometimes the direct cause of this evil. However, after Habakkuk finishes his lament and waits upon God, God speaks out to him and teaches that evil nations will rise up, but evil nations will also meet their end. Many times, evil nations will meet their end by the hands of another evil nation. Israel was in no way a good nation at the time. It was evil. And Babylon was the evil that came to destroy that evil. The cycle of nations, their rise and their fall, are all ordained by God. There are no accidents. This is comforting, but it's also troublesome, especially when we come to acknowledge the failings in our own nations. I'm in America, as many of us are, and there's a lot of turmoil. There has been. There continues to be. We struggle with the damaging effects of social inequality. And many times this is racial, but it's also economic. I see the ways that the rich and powerful are in control, and they leave the scraps of our resources for the majority of people to fight over. On a global scale, most of the wealth in the world resides in America. And we absolutely refuse to properly share it with the people who are suffering. It's not an uncommon conversation amongst me and my friends to talk about Jeff Bezos and his wealth. It's something almost $200 billion in his net worth. No one needs that much money. No one really needs a good portion, a fraction of that money. I think Jeff Bezos makes for a really good modern day Babylon. But if Bezos is Babylon, we're still Israel. There is a larger evil, but we're still to blame for the rifts in our community and the blind eye that we give to other people. Habakkuk makes it clear that no one is blameless. No one is without need of correction. So what do we do with this information? Well, according to Habakkuk, we lament. We cry out to God in the same way that Habakkuk cried out. We don't do it with a chip on our shoulder, thinking that we know what's best, but we do it in humility. We understand our shortcomings, and we don't fear them. We acknowledge them and bring them to God. We cry out to God in our confusion and in our pain, and we give hope to the answers that God gives us in return, and those answers drive hope even further. The evils of this world will be brought down, and it might be by the hands of something evil of itself. New evils will always rise, but they will also always fall. And God stands above it, orchestrating the rise and fall of nations, the rise and fall of evil. And the best news is that good is what is left in its wake. Because when our pride is finally shattered, that's when we listen. That's when we hear the instruction of God and realize just how far we have to go. The hope that God gives us through the story of Habakkuk is that God is marching towards us from the promised land. The 3rd chapter talks about the Exodus and how God brings his people out of Egypt. And it likens the future, the rise and fall of nations, in a similar exodus. That God comes from heaven to us. He hears our cries. They don't fall on deaf ears. God leaves heaven to comfort and guide us and protect us from the evils in this world. But this protection and guidance doesn't come before we face the consequences of our actions, because they shape us into better people. I think of it this way. We all have a very firm grasp on the concept of a spoiled child who has received everything they could ever want, and no one likes that child. In fact, we might have a deep-seated loathing for that child. Honestly, it makes my blood boil just thinking about the people I have met who don't understand the word no. So why would God ever want to spoil us in this way? Why would God ever want a bunch of spoiled brats as followers who only care about themselves? The kindest people I have met are the ones who have faced great hardship and overcome them. And they didn't overcome it themselves. They understand that it took a community of people surrounding them to help them get through hardships. They understand that it's God who brings us through pain and hard things and the evil in this world. Not through the strength of their own hands, but by the strength of many hands lifting them up. That's what Habakkuk teaches. All evil will be punished, and it's within God's timing. And it's not through our hands, but God's, and God through other people helping us. With the destruction of evil in the world, surrounding us and in us, we become better. We become humble, we get rid of our pride, and we listen to the teachings of God. And eventually, all evil will be destroyed. Currently, God is using evil to destroy evil, but eventually God will come himself and destroy evil with good. And what we're left with is the best. But that's difficult when we're sitting in pain. We know that God is so much bigger than we can imagine. And the plans that God have for this world are good, but they don't always make sense when we're stuck in this moment and in this place. But that doesn't mean that we can stop trusting God. We still have to hold firm to the truth that God will rush out towards us when we're in our times of most need. Again, when we're stuck in this time and place, this river of time, we can't fathom the ocean that God is in. We only experience a small piece of what is at work, while God sees the whole picture. Our hope in God and in God's plans doesn't mean that we're always going to be calm. Doesn't mean we're always at peace. We're still going to face confusion, and God knows that. We're still going to face fear, and God knows that. But when we're feeling confused, we shouldn't bottle it up inside and start pointing at the people around us and saying, "You're the problem, you're at fault." We need to realize the parts we're playing, point the fingers back at ourselves, and realize the ways that we're contributing to the evil. As God is rushing towards us, I hope we can realize in humility that we are in need of help from God and from others, from the evil that surrounds us, and that the evil within ourselves needs to be destroyed as well. Again, I say we don't have to fully understand God's plans to be able to trust that God has the best in mind for creation. We can wait for the inevitable triumph of God. And during this time, we need to take a critical look within ourselves to understand the ways that we have harmed others and the way that we can make amends. It's not enough to just know that we've done wrong. And God isn't calling us to just know and feel guilty and feel bad about what's happened. God is calling us to make amends. To go to our brother and our sister and say, "I'm sorry." Our pride doesn't allow that, and so it needs to be shattered. Once that happens, once we're in humility, once the evils of this world become destroyed within ourselves, that's when reconciliation can happen. So God, I want to say, as we go from wherever we are, I pray that you guide our steps. I pray that we continue to create good, that we continue to destroy the evil in ourselves, and acknowledge the ways that we need your help and help from others. Amen. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope you made it this far. I'm looking forward to your comments, hearing what was good and what could use improvement. So, thank you all. Good night.